One of the things that you do brilliantly is that you bring us with you on that journey, and your memory was great, how you recreated that time. Did you keep a journal or something? I mean, how did you remember some of those details?
Well, and again, that's what I mean by personal mythos. When it's burned so deeply into the soul of your being by way of living it so completely, it's not memory. You know, it's being. It's like, it was interesting writing this book. I always had a story, because many people have come to me over the years for, you know, encouragement or help in one form or another. I always had a story, and those stories, when told, come alive in me all over again. When I wrote the book, it was like reliving the experience. So it's not memory. I mean, memory is sort of the finessing of the details, which you can take or leave, but the reality of it and the substance of it comes from being. And I think we've all, you know, you read books and they're entertaining or they're interesting or they're curious, and then you read a book and your whole body, you know, takes it in, and you know it in a different kind of a way. I think when we are in touch with our personal mythos as it unfolds, it's a complete body experience. So I don't even think of it as memory. I mean, I don't even have a good memory. I don't think of myself as having a very good memory. But I come alive with my own journey when it's brought to light again.
So, well, what I thought was helpful for me, because in my own spiritual growth, one of the things I've been consciously wanting to be free of, and I remember I got this from Ram Dass way back in the early 70s or maybe late 70s when he wrote Be Here Now, and then but this whole idea of being free from our conditioning. And one of the things that you did, and I would love you to see where you'd like to jump into it, but you actually did just give up everything. I mean, you got rid of your possessions. I mean, you stopped working, and you just totally relied upon God as your support.
Yeah, still do, at some level. I mean, I'm living, you know, what looks like a normal life, but that hasn't changed. Well, I mean, at the time, I knew there had to be a God of everything or a God of nothing, and there was no halfway measures. I mean, it was like you either trust everything with that possibility, or why bother, kind of thing. And again, I sensed by making myself vulnerable in the laboratory, the studio, coming up against inspiration. Inspiration was always a quantum leap. It was always a wild card that blew out the known. Everything you think you knew, everything you think you were doing would get taken to a whole new level, and that's inspiration. And it would just like renew everything that felt most valuable. And so I knew that I could do that with my life, from having, in a sense, mastered it in the smallness of that studio existence, but I couldn't do it in life. But I knew it, I intuited that it was possible, and that's what I gave myself to. And it proved to be true. I mean, even as an artist, you think, well, an artist, if you destroy your art, then you're not an artist, then who are you? But, you know, curiously, I became more known as an artist for destroying my work than I ever did for creating it. And I think that's part of the paradox. You know, sacrifice means to make sacred. When we could put all we love on the altar, all of our hopes and dreams and what we hold most precious on the altar, with a willingness to let it go, when it comes back sanctified.
Right.
And, you know, and I'm doing art now again. Art came back in a way that I didn't expect. I mean, I became more of an artist by letting it go than I ever did by trying to achieve that status.
Well, you really are an example, a model for those of us who have a vision of what it would be like to be in life. And I love how you say it, innocently. And what you mean by that is, like I can sit here, I can see as I sit here talking with you, I'm noticing what my mind is doing. You know, in other words, I want to make sure I ask you the right questions, and I want to, you know, make sure that we talk. I mean, I want to draw out your brilliance and who you are, and that really comes from the part of my mind that is trying to control the situation, and instead of just it really is a free fall, isn't it? A free fall into life. I mean, you're really talking about a whole new way of being in life.
Yes, in a way that's where you're trusting that consciousness knows better than we do with our strategy and control and everything we think we're doing. So, I mean, in a way, we all dabble in that. And, so I don't think most of us know what we're talking about here. I mean, most of us have experience. For a lot of us, it's hit and miss. It's kind of luck of the draw. We just happen to do something right. But we see the magic kick in, and we even our egos often take credit for it. But what if we could get our ego enough out of the way where we could actually go about that process in a much more reverent way? And I think that's possible for all of us, and it's available to all of us. However much we're willing to trust it is as much as it meets us. And
right.
if we're running our own show, then the gods are busy elsewhere, I feel. But we all have access to that.
Right. And what about that experience that you relate to us of you coming, you came upon these gang members? And do you want to tell, would you be willing to share that story? Do you know which one I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. And you brought them up to your apartments? You actually brought them into your home, and that was you really were willing to risk.
Well, again, there's a God of everything or a God of nothing, and I didn't ask for that moment. When I gave everything up, or the beginnings of it, that was when I actually still had art, but I was already feeling like I needed to trust life, just as it was. And one day, because I fasted a lot, I didn't sleep a lot, and I went for a late night walk out on the street. And coming up to my building, there was a gang out in front of my door, sitting on the stoop. And, I kind of took a double take because I had a friend who was visiting was beaten up exactly in that place a week before, so I knew, there was dangers out in the street. So I just approached the door and I said, "Can I get in here?" And they kind of didn't move, and so they said, "You live here?" So I said, "Yes." And they just still didn't move. They were quiet, and they were drinking out of a brown bag, drinking bottles. And so they said, "Can we come in?" So it was one of those moments where I could give in to fear, and I don't know what I would have done, or I could trust. I trusted, and I said, "Sure." So they came upstairs, walking up the stairs, I heard the bottle crash against the wall, and there was no one in the building. It was a loft building full of artists, but I was the only one that lived there. People came and go during the day. And so it was abandoned except for me. And so my loft, it was a big 2,000 square foot space cut in half. Half was on the Hudson River side, which was the living quarters, and the other half was the studio where all the artwork was. And there was a huge amount of artwork at that time. And so we were entered into the kitchen area, and we sat down, and I tried to talk to them, and I could tell they were very guarded, and they were just kind of looking around, and I knew they didn't know quite what to do with me since I trusted them. It's almost like they would have known what to do if I resisted them, but I didn't. So at one point, they were just getting restless, and I just sensed I had to move. So I said, "Let me show you of images, powerful images that certainly different for these young kids, street kids." And so there was really a transforming moment, because they really started looking at the work, and they said, there was a silence, and they said, "Wow, did you do all this?" And I said, "Yes." And then they started picking out their favorites and calling each other over. They left very respectfully. When at first, that was the other thing. The last thing they said before I jumped up, they said, "Well, we got to smoke this joint." It's literally what they said, and that's when I said, "Well, let me show you what I do." And there was an absolute turnaround where they became respectful. And interestingly enough, years afterwards, I would run into those kids, and when they were, closer to adult, often pushing a baby carriage, and they would say, "Oh, I remember you. You're that artist guy." So it was one of those moments where, again, you might die here, but unless you can fully inhabit that possibility, you don't get the life and the liberation. Because what that did it was healing to them, it was healing to me, because I was afraid of gangs. I was afraid of moments like that. And what that gave me, it let me know that the gods are indeed involved in everything if we can trust it at that level. So the alternative, I think, would have been a frightened life, and I think it would have been, probably would not have been such a good turnout if I had given in to my fear. And I think